Good Friday, March 21st, 2008. Kind of a historical year for Easter. Easter hadn't been this early in 95 years. Won't be this early again for another 200-some years. Easter's the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the spring equinox. If you go outside and look tonight, you'll see a full moon. Beautiful full moon. This video is about questions that I'm sure we've all had. I know atheists, non-believers have them. They question God because of some of the verses in the Bible, such as women should be quiet in church. Paul tells us that. When that was written, during Paul's time, during that culture, women would sit on one side of the synagogue, men on the other, and women would holler across to the men, disrupted the service. I think that's what prompted Paul to write that. There's other things like if a young girl marries and the man comes into her and finds out she's a virgin, he can take her to her father and stone her to death. Is that God speaking there? Or is that man speaking about the culture they lived in? Would God actually have a young girl killed today for not being a virgin? You know, young girls can lose their virginity in other things other than sex. I know it's rare, but it can happen. If she were to marry and her husband says she's not a virgin, let's kill her. Is that God? Women are not to pray without their head covered. Scriptures say that nature tells us that it's a shame for a man to have long hair, but it's a glory for a woman to have long hair. Her hair is her covering. Look at the Muslims today. They still practice such. Women's head has to be covered. If you go to our churches, or if you look at some of the holy women here on YouTube, do they have long hair? Or they cut their hair? Does that make them any less holy in God's eyes? I know the Bible is the inspired Word of God, but it's written by men at a different time, different culture. I sometimes wonder about homosexuals. I hate what homosexuals do. Although I love homosexuals. Saw one in the grocery store the other day that I've known almost my entire life. We don't talk about his homosexuality. But as I left him, I told him I loved him. Because I do. Be lying if I said I did. But I hate what he does. But would I kill him for it? Do I believe God would have him killed for it? I'm talking about in this life. I read where the wages of sin are death. I don't read where the wages of sin is torment and eternal hell burning for eternity. That is something that came later in another culture other than the time that Jesus walked the earth. He had no concept of our visions of a torturous hell. So things change, translations change, but yet we always say it's the inspired Word of God, and it's true. How much of it is man's words and culture, the time we live in? Jesus says we should love God with all our heart, soul, our whole being, and the second commandment is to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Let's don't deprive anybody of those two commandments through words of men. Love y'all.